Good evening. We're going to go ahead and get started with our panel tonight. For those of you who are joining us, and then also hello to those of you who we know are watching after the fact, because we are recording this webinar this evening, and we've seen a lot of views the following day and days. So want to first start out by mentioning an upcoming webinar that we have at 7 o'clock on Wednesday, February 19th on navigating financial decision making. It is a free nonprofit service meant to help those in trauma facing all of the many financial decisions that you are undertaking at this time. Helpful for everybody, renter, owner, no matter who you are, really great stuff. If you are interested in any type of assistance, we are here for you. You can email us at fireaid, that's FIREAIDE at OURKI.org. We also have a website with a ton of different resources. That is OURKI.org/PaliFire, PALIFIRE. And then if you'd like to donate to the community, we're doing grants directly to those impacted. You can do that at ourki.org/firefund. So for those of you who may be new to the webinar format, at the bottom of your screen, you can click on the Q&A button and can ask questions there. We'll try and answer as many of those as we possibly can. And with that, I'd like to throw it to Jennifer Gray Thompson, the wonderful founder and CEO of After the Fire, who'll be moderating tonight's discussion.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you everyone for having us again. It means a lot to us to be here for you at this very challenging time. If you're not familiar already, After the Fire was founded really because we didn't have anybody in 2017 to sort of walk us through the really difficult job of navigating after a mega fire. We are always survivor focused first, and we try to bring you people and experts that we know are going to have a ton of compassion and are going to center your experience. And we're very honored tonight to have two wonderful guests with us. Thank you so much for allowing us to be here with you in this very important moment in your lives. So thank you. Jen?
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Jen Cowish. I've been supporting After the Fire since they came into our fire community and the Marshall Fire in the Boulder, Colorado area. I have a smoke damaged home, so a lot of the information experiences I have are around what it's like to recover a smoke damaged home and then living in the area once you've moved back in the recovery process. So yeah. I think with that, I'll turn it over to Ozzy, and then Ozzy, when you're done, you can turn it over to Dr. Kalsa.
Sure. Thanks, Jen. As you said, my name is Ozzy Barron. I'm the co-founder and deputy director of a nonprofit called Project Camp, and we are an emergency relief childcare organization. So we can pop up day camps for children impacted by disasters anywhere in the country in about 48 hours. And our bread and butter is opening up these child-friendly, trauma-informed spaces where parents can drop kids off in the immediate aftermath of fires, hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, so that kids have a safe, recognizable, kid-centric space to play, to process, to see old friends, to meet new friends, and to sort of return to normal, while parents are freed up to go have the hard conversations they need to have, talk to insurance, talk to FEMA, go see what happened to their house a lot of times, get involved in relief efforts, get back to work, whatever it is that parents need to do. So our mission, our ethos is to provide care for children, by extension, relief for families and resilience for the communities as a whole. Because if we can take care of kids and help get parents processing and back to work, we can help the whole community get back on its feet just a little bit faster. And so, Dr. Kalsa, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Ozzy. So my name is Saib Khalsa. I'm an associate professor of psychiatry at UCLA, director of anxiety disorders research for the Semel Institute for Neuroscience and Human Behavior. I recently moved back to LA after spending 9 years living in Oklahoma. And I found that my skills as a tornado survivor were put to the test when the fires came through LA. I have many friends and colleagues who've lost their homes and communities, and my heart goes out to all of you who are similarly affected. I thought I would start with a few comments, and then we'll get into sort of the Q&A, which I know there were some questions asked earlier. So surviving a fire disaster brings immense challenges. Grief over the loss of a home, cherished belongings, or even a loved one, coupled with confusion and heightened anxiety from real and perceived dangers. Our nervous systems constantly process signals from our bodies and our surroundings, trying to distinguish what I call true alarms or real threats from false alarms or perceived threats. Ultimately, both types can trigger the same stress responses within the body, leading to anxiety, exhaustion, and even health issues over time. Anxiety arises when the brain perceives a threat in the absence of a danger, and this can happen during both true and false alarms. So this heightened level of anxiety can also cause freezing responses, making it harder to take the right action at the right time, or even long after the danger has passed. In a delayed version, this has been called brain fog or even fire brain. Now, it's important to remember that distress following a disaster is a natural response. It's not necessarily the sign of a mental health condition. However, if the distress begins to interfere with your ability to function at home, at work, at school, to maintain meaningful relationships, or makes it difficult to engage in your usual hobbies, it might be time to seek help from a qualified professional. Recognizing the body's early signs of stress or anxiety and choosing alternative actions, like slowing your breath, shifting your focus, can sometimes help prevent a full-blown alarm. But to help regain a sense of control and to promote mental health, one thing that you can try is something called the PRN approach. Stands for pause, reset, and nourish. Pausing is when you just take a step back to try to identify whether the sensations and the thoughts are signaling a true or a false alarm. Check in with your body, with your mind, with your feelings. Then resetting involves acknowledging that you're feeling uncentered in the moment and trying to calm your nervous system using techniques you may have done in the past, deep breathing, meditation, petting an animal, or just stepping away from stressors like news feeds or digital devices. And then the nourish part it's really important to foster healthy routines, prioritize sleep, exercise, time with supportive people. Try to find moments of joy and stillness, such as listening to music, spending time in natural settings, or practicing yoga or other forms of movement that may bring that nourishment. So by learning to act and when to pause, when to hold on, and when to let go, you can build resilience and move forward with greater clarity, calm, and strength. With that, we'll get into the Q&A because I know we had some questions already.
Yeah, thank you. This first question is actually coming from somebody who's said they're 80, and it really opens up a broader conversation. Everyone who's going through this is going to experience this differently, depending on where they're at in their life. So if you have any advice or, how would you adjust some of these recommendations for people in various stages of their life? I know in our community, what worked for teens didn't work for, adults, and what the senior community was trying to figure out was very different than what the, young 20s were doing. So if you have any specific advice on that.
Why don't we start with Ozzy and then go to Dr. Khalsa? Is that okay with you? Thank you.
Sure. I will say, we typically work with children ages 6 to 16. So while we have volunteers who are 80 who come help out, I think a lot of what we at Project Camp try to do to help children through it children process in ways unique to them. They process differently than adults, but a lot of the framework, a lot of the ideas behind it, I think do pertain to people of all ages. And they may look different for somebody who's 50, who's 25, who's 7, who's 80. But a lot of what we do is try to sort of return to touchstones of normalcy and show that life might not go back to exactly the way it was, but there is still life, there's still community, there still is friendship, and optimistic futures in whatever this new reality is. So for children, play is they process a lot through play, and playing is something native and natural and normal to a kid. If you swap play out for whatever it is that is native and natural and comfortable to you, that helps you feel like you're returning to normal. I really like what Dr. Khalsa was just saying about that sort of nourishment. And I think that can take many different forms. Dr. Khalsa, correct me if that's wrong. But if you are a big reader, making time, forcing a pause in your space, in your day, no matter how hectic it is, to read. If you FaceTime with your sister every afternoon, FaceTiming your sister, those things that help you feel like you have your feet back on the ground, like you are you again. I think in children, we really see help shift from a mentality of, I am a victim. This is something that has happened to me, and that is an identity, to this is something I'm going through. And I am who I was before. I will be the same person after. Right now, I'm going through something big, but if you can get back to a space where you're able to do some of the things that you love, that bring you joy, that make you feel like you're in a normal space, it can sort of help put into context what you're going through, so that it isn't a new identity. You are evacuated, but you're not an evacuee for all of time, for example. And anything we can do to help children avoid that sort of encroachment into who they are, it really, really helps. And it helps lift spirits and sort of shift that trajectory of the onset of long-term trauma. I don't know, Dr. Kals, I don't want to speak for you. I would assume that is also true for people in their 60s, 70s, 80s, 30s, whatever it is. But that would be my best shot at that.
Thank you. Dr. Fawcett?
Yeah, so pausing, resetting, and nourishing is incredibly difficult to do. It's kind of easy to read off, but the practice of it, precisely during a time when all you can think of are the things that you have to do, whatever your life was before the fire. As busy as that was, as consuming as it was, now you have this whole other set of circumstances. And so in some ways it can feel really disconcerting to try to do the opposite of what you want to do. Of course, your skill sets and your responsibilities are going to vary if you're 40 as compared to when you're 80. Your knowledge of what works and what doesn't is also going to vary, and your physical abilities and your cognitive abilities are also going to vary. So in the question, it was sort of help, I'm 80, right? Well, I wouldn't advise an 80-year-old to take time to go play basketball with one's friends, or to go bike riding, unless that's a normal activity for that individual, right? So you may have to sort of tailor the kinds of nourishment to the things that work for you. It doesn't mean you can't also start new forms of nourishment, new forms of movement, new activities. But really, you have to sort of, in that pausing moment, look at what your abilities are and what you can really meaningfully take a step towards. In fact, some of the most important aspects would be to actually consciously make a decision to nourish. Even that step alone, you're taking steps towards wellness that are part of that PRN process. So it's going to be very different. If you're 80, you may also be looking after other people. So you have sort of a host of other responsibilities to consider. The way that you connect with folks may not always be direct. It may be through online versions, but whatever finds meaning for you, taking those steps is important.
Thank you. I think that's a really good lead into the next question. You mentioned this already, Dr. Khalsa, about fire brain. It's a term that we love to use in the recovery, but it's hard to know when that's what's driving you, or when you've moved away from it a bit and you're a little more clear-headed. And so the question is, how can you recover from this fire brain, or how can you even know that you're moving, beyond that instant response to the fire?
We'll start with
Yeah.
Dr. Khalsa. Go ahead.
Sure. So what I'm going to mention are some things that I have come across that I think are useful and that have been described as being useful by people who've experienced this. Not having experienced firebrain or brain fog myself, you have to take some of this with a grain of salt. But the things that I've heard and learned to be effective. Number one, um, your cognitive resources are depleted, so don't be afraid to outsource certain activities, even if it's only temporarily, right? Have groceries delivered. Ask people for help. You may not be the type of person who wants to do that, but you will find that it's actually incredibly helpful. Along those lines, in relation to the fire, I've heard that hiring a public adjuster, somebody who can help you handle claims processes, may be helpful, although I'm not the expert. I would sort of put that in the category of potential outsourcing. Certainly, getting help from somebody who knows more, and I think this Jen's organization is incredible at doing just that. So by you being on this call, you're actually already sort of doing some of that process. Communicate not just with other people, but with yourself. So we're starting a recovery diary. So keep daily notes, names and contact info of people you've spoken with, a summary of what they've said. You're not expected to remember everything that comes across your plate, right? So, and I actually find this useful in my personal life. So it's not, maybe not just a firebrain thing, but an information overload thing. Breaking tasks, something that seems insurmountable. Well, what's the first step? And then starting with the first step. Getting in-person help, disaster recovery centers, volunteer aid organizations. If you're on this call again, if you're working on a task, say you've started a first step, put a timer. You're not expected to sort of be solution oriented. You can't accomplish everything that you want to accomplish the moment you sit down to do it. So give yourself a time limit and then take a break and then maybe come back and then take a longer break and then come back. Something called the Pomodoro technique. There's actually been a substantial interest in trying to figure out in the workplace how to accomplish and be refreshed. Stepping away, as actually the NPR did a podcast series last year called Body Electric. And as part of that, there was a study where they actually randomized people into different stages of doing essentially the Pomodoro technique, where you work for a little bit and then you step away, even just for 5 minutes. I practiced that myself. I find that to be useful in my own work. Call on your senses. So doing something that brings you into your sort of personal space, into your body, can help with the break. Listening to music, scented candles, dimly lit, quiet room, right? Something that sort of gives you a temporary respite. That's, again, part of that pause in the PRN. Reward yourself. So promise yourself a reward in advance for completing a task, right? I'm going to get a bite of chocolate. I'm going to sit in the sun. I'm going to call a friend. Visualize that reward before you start it. And then the last thing is practicing self-compassion. Probably the biggest thing that you can do is give yourself a break. Recovery, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And so if you keep that in mind, and this is also something that I find to be incredibly useful, is really step back and see, where are you in relation to the horizon? Don't stare at the horizon, but also just know that it's there. It's normal to feel overwhelmed.
Ozzy, before we kick it to you, I'm going to say this, that we had our fires in October of 2017, and I did not lose my home, but we lost a lot all around me, and I grew up here, and it was so disconcerting that I think it was like a year and a half before I felt pretty okay. It was 5 years until I felt totally okay. And a lot of self-compassion. I love that you wrapped it up with that, is really important, but also to have grace for whoever is in front of you. They are operating out of trauma. If they lost their home, didn't lose their home, lost 4 homes, lost a family member, everyone is affected, but obviously to different degrees, but to try to have a lot of grace for that. And if you find yourself like, I found myself so purpose driven for so long after the fires, and Jen and I have bonded over this, that even in my marriage, I was like, okay, just put yourself on a shelf for the next 2 to 3 years, because you are not the priority right now. And even now, when there is a fire, my husband just calls himself like a widower for a little while. He knows that I'm going to be emotionally absent for a period of time, but you have to consciously bring yourself back. And I had my blood pressure skyrocketed in that year after our fires. I didn't take good care of myself. It's really normal, but also don't be mad at yourself if you're not getting an A and taking care of yourself. That's part of the self-compassion. I just really want to say, like, we are imperfect as we move through this, but you can move through it, and you will move through it, but allow it to be a marathon of sprints. And I say this all the time because you need to rest in between and also hold each other accountable for, checking in and saying, how you doing? Like the people who work with me do it with me all the time. And even when I don't want it, but I need it. That's the thing. So, maybe Ozzy, did you want to speak to that, or Jen?
Sure, I'm happy to. One of the tools, one of the pillars of our trauma-informed care model that we use at camp with kids that we train all of our volunteers on, we call our me checks. It is a simple 1 to 10 scale of roughly how stressed out you're feeling. It's judgment-free, but a 1 is you're limp as a noodle, you're about to fall asleep, you're super relaxed. A 10 is that fight or flight, that sort of reptilian brain. You can't see straight, you're about to crack in half. As we say to kids, like you feel like you're a bolt of lightning. And we teach that as just a very simple entree to talk to kids who are struggling or having a hard time, who are confused, to step out and see, how are you feeling? And doing that yourself as a grown-up still works. And if you are struggling to get a task done, if you're frustrated with yourself, stepping back and like, okay, I'm like a 9 out of 10 on the stress scale. With kids, we say, what flavor of 9 are you? Are you scared? Are you nervous? Are you excited? Are you tell me more about this 9. And um, firebrain, brain fog, they're big general terms that cover a lot of ground. And even seeing, the comment that came in the Q&A, sometimes you're physically exhausted. Sometimes you are mentally exhausted. Sometimes you're angry. Sometimes you're grieving. Sometimes you feel abandoned, like a million people showed up to help out, and then 2 weeks later, they're all gone. And here we are still dealing with this. So what brain fog is can feel different in the moment. Jennifer, you used the exact word that we use in training our volunteers. Give each other a little extra grace, and give yourself a little extra grace, and do what you can, which is an impossible ask, to look at, like, am I being impulsive or reckless, or are you acting out in certain ways? There is no one thing that if a person or if a kid does this, oh, that's trauma. Like, okay, that's a trauma reaction. But the people that well, like, anytime she's cutting off all of her hair, she's like really stressed out at work. Or anytime we see kids not eat lunch just because they need to exert a choice. If you see that in yourself, if you see that in family members and friends, giving that extra grace, that extra patience, giving yourself a break, or just, I'll deal with it tomorrow, can sometimes be enough to just get through. You don't have to, like Jennifer, you said it perfectly. Like sometimes you're just at a 10 and you don't have to work for 3 years when you're a 10. You can come back to it when you're an 8. That's not a perfect frame of mind, but that's better. So you feel different things. The parents we talk to, the kids we talk to are going through different things, a lot of which I think get categorized as like just sort of feeling fuzzy or foggy, or it's hard to prioritize. And yeah, checking in with yourself and not trying to redline it when you're just exhausted beyond. Sometimes you have to, but if you don't have to, that can make a ton of difference, and just making you feel a little more human, bringing you a few notches further down on that me check scale before you have to embark on whatever the next task is.
I did want to add 2 things that came to mind in our recovery. Was if you can and it feels right for you, leave the area and take a break. Like go away from where all the people are talking about is the fire and just put it down for a minute. This helped a lot of people kind of reframe when they came back, even if it was for a couple days or just driving to, another part of the state to just be somewhere else where everyone's not centered around the fire. Because I waited way too long to do that. And when I finally did, I think there was some guilt. There was like, I don't know how to walk. I don't know how to leave there's so much stuff to do. I can't like leave. And when I finally did, it was like, oh, so it was so good to just put it down for a second and realize no one was going to ask me about it, and I could just not talk about it for a few minutes, and I really needed that. And a lot of the community spoke with each other about what a relief it was. But the complete opposite is to be with the community and be with people and be with the ones that are going through the same things that you're going through. I think depending on, people's trauma response, some people can really isolate or be stoic and not connect, emotionally. And we found in our community, it was just really helpful for community gatherings and people to just be together. And even if nothing was accomplished, just the sheer fact that there was 50 other people that were also exhausted, and it really normalizes and validates the experience that I'm going to ask, but some of the questions are coming in about that the world moves on, and you can be left feeling like your heart has been ripped out and people don't care. And when you're with your community, that is a little bit of an insulation from that because they're all going through the same thing. So yeah, if I don't know if you want to add anything, Jennifer, but okay. So yeah, it takes me into the next, the questions they're kind of similar in the chat. And I really feel these questions. One, the push from the world, whether it is your job or your living situation or people outside of the area that have moved on to the next news story. It's really hard when the world is telling you to let's get back to normal because nothing feels normal. And so if the question is, how do we manage this when people are pushing us to get back to normal?
Dr. Khalsa?
Well, yeah, that's really tough because the expectations for normalcy and status quo are going to be there, and they're going to be there long term. I actually I think Jennifer's comment about feeling the effects 5 years later, 7 years later. I mean, that's that horizon piece. So in some ways, it would be nice to not get that feedback from other people. But in order for that to happen, you would have to just live under a rock, and that's not possible. It's not healthy, right? So the challenge is how do you marshal your resources, knowing that this is going to be something for the long term, and this may sound a bit sort of stock, but that PRN piece, making sure that you're taking time to pause, to reset, and to nourish, because sometimes, when somebody comes at you with that kind of response, that in and of itself is sometimes a signal to say, okay, I just need to take a moment and process this rather than bury it, right? See it for what it is, and find ways to reset, find ways to nourish. Jen, your comment about stepping away, getting outside of your town, that's a really potent way that you can reduce a certain type of environmental stimulation, right? You can modify the signals that when somebody talks to you, when somebody asks you for something, it affects you both mentally and physically, right? Jennifer, you talked about your blood pressure changes, right? These are all part of a stress response, and to ignore it, I think, is to your own peril and to your own perpetuation. So there's a concept in sort of stress science called allostasis, and you may have heard of the sister term homeostasis. you don't know what homeostasis is, maintaining, you think of it as maintaining a balance, but really what it is it's sort of your body's way to reactively regulate when there's something that affects your physiology, something that affects your mental state. So that's homeostasis. Allostasis is when you sort of anticipate a potential impact and you adjust for it. So, for example, if you know you have to go to work, right? And you can know ahead of time that this is the mindset that people have moved on. So how am I going to preemptively address this for myself, right? Again, with resetting, with nourishing, and compassion.
And remember that they're going to say things to you that they shouldn't say to you, like it was just stuff, or you didn't die, or they people will try to minimize it, and they're doing it because can make them feel more comfortable with your loss and your grief. And unfortunately, we hear that in every single fire. We hear that over and over again, that it's okay just to either not say anything or give somebody a hug, or to think about, like, it's okay to even help your friends, you can talk about how to talk to you about your loss, or what, it's okay to set the tone for that, because people will move on. I'm just going to tell a quick story. A few years ago, when I did the Dixie Fire in Greenville burned down, it's a little town of 821 people and about 1,000 homes, because on the outskirts too, were gone, and in a 1,000,000-acre fire that lasted for 100 days. And for the people who were still had in their homes, it rushed at them 4 different times. And we're talking 500-foot wall of it was really awful, right? So in the middle of that, they asked me to come like 4 days later, and it's usually too early. But they said, we need you to come because we need hope. And I was like, okay, all right, I'll be right there. And so I came right there. And then the gentleman that I was working with, Ken Donnell, he said to me, he came to Sonoma about a month later, where I live. And he felt like he felt weird because he lost 2 businesses, 2 homes. It was really sad. But he would go and he would tell people in our town, and they were like, because we'd had 4 mega fires already. So also be prepared that it also can be like almost an out of body experience when you're with people who haven't experienced it. So it can be great, but it can also be very odd too at the same time if you expect for them to not have moved on. It was an odd thing. And then I made the mistake of putting him in front of another fire survivor who was not ready. And I saw dueling trauma in front of me. And I learned right there to be more discerning in how I carried forth. I wanted him to see rebuilds, essentially. And a big part of our work is around healing. This is why I always have literally hundreds of fire survivors who want to come with us to the next fire. That's the price that we ask. Like, would you come with us if I asked you to the next fire? And they really love to do it. And you can actually watch the healing almost in real time. We just had the managing director of Maui with us. And it was wonderful to watch him work with the community, especially in Altadena, and to find the connections right there. And all of a sudden to feel, instead of like underwater, but instead like have a corner of, oh, I got you. I can tell you what's around the corner, what I see, or maybe we can connect on ways that my community is experiencing this and yours is, and we can make it a little bit better. People and community are key. So I just wanted to say that. Ozzy?
I don't have a ton to add here. I'm curious though. One thing that we hear a lot in the immediate, the few days or weeks immediately after an event like this, we heard it in Lahaina, actually, after the Dixie Fire in Los Angeles, most recently, is something that was actually echoed in the comment about how I don't know if it's the term I've heard used is compassion fatigue. And when your community is in it, when the whole community went through it together, usually if something happens to you, if I'm in a car accident, my neighbor can come over and help take care of me. But when all of your neighbors went through the same thing, the community sort of runs out of gas all at the same time. And there's also, Jennifer, you said something that resonated too. People that lost 2 houses hear things like, yeah, well, I don't know, you're rich, so like you'll figure it out. And people who are renters didn't lose the house that they owned, so they'll be fine. They'll figure it. And I feel like everybody is sort of cut out of the cookie at one point or another and told that they'll be fine because they're whatever it is that they are. Um, I don't have any good answers, but those are common themes I've seen come up in communities where we've responded time and again. I don't know if Jennifer, Jen, or Dr. Kalsa, you guys as people who've gone through this in the long term, who've seen sort of the other side of community rebuilding, or Dr. Kalsa, your clinical background, if you have advice or answers or anything.
Dr.
on
Kalsa, you want to run with that?
Yeah, well, I'll sort of take the clinical piece of it, which is that if this is weighing on you, I mean, it's going to weigh on everybody, but if it's weighing on you disproportionately to the point where it's interfering with your ability to function in your usual roles, that's a time for the pause part of PRN to step back and to ask a different question, which is, do I need a bigger source of support here? Do I need to take action, in the mental health from a mental health professional, or do I need to reach out and I would be more quick to lean on that response if this is a concern. Because having that kind of support in place, if things get worse, I think is going to really help to boost everything. The better your mental health is doing in the face of compassion fatigue, the better you're going to be able to handle all the other real challenges that are there that aren't going away, that take years, right? So I would sort of be quick to reach out for mental health professionals' support, even if they say, you know what, I've seen worse, right? That you have that information, and you can go back if it does get worse, right?
Really quickly before Jen reads the next question, Dr. Kalsa, can you talk about people who are not used to asking for help, who are at the top of their profession, who are used to knowing so much about how to navigate life, really struggle in moments like these when they're sort of caught in really a very much a life-changing event. That's why we're called After the Fire. So I was just wondering if you had any advice for those people experiencing, this kind of, it's like, I don't know, it's very hard for people who are doers or type A personalities to understand like they didn't have control. And I've actually had people in front of me from the Palisades who feel guilty for not doing like a better job at knowing what was going to happen, not saving more things, not all of that. And my response to them is, how could you have known? I mean, you couldn't have really known. It was the unimaginable. And so can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So certainly, I think that the key place to start from is a place of self-compassion, because you can't know, no one can know everything. And even given all of the available information, there's no way that you could predict what's going to happen from one moment to the next. So it's okay to not feel in control, even if if that is something that prior to this point has been a source of professional or personal success, pride, admiration from others. Not feeling not feeling in control, and really sort of being able to say, I need help, is probably the biggest act of self-compassion that you can do, but also one of the hardest. Sometimes it takes the ability to step back and listen to the information that you're getting from other people. People will tell you. Sometimes they'll tell you directly, and sometimes not so direct. But that would be sort of the biggest thing in terms of the mechanics of how to actually find help. That's a different and really a secondary step. the first thing is really to figure out that you need help. And I am continually inspired and impressed by my patients who make that every time they come into the office. It's from that realization that they know that something's not right, and taking that step to get help is one of the best things that they could have ever done. So.
Yeah, definitely. I will say from my own personal experience, I went like hard for a year, and our 1 year anniversary of the fires started to come around, and I broke, and I was just crying all the time, and I wasn't efficient. It was like all systems were failing, and I just mentally couldn't understand why. And realized like, oh, I haven't been taking care of myself at all. I've been taking care of everything else. And so that's when I got a therapist. And after I started going a few times, I was like, wow, why did I wait this long? I really needed this help 9 months ago. It was, so I do always like to encourage people that even if it isn't your thing and it's never been something you've needed before, you've just experienced an unimaginable event and no one's prepared for this. So getting support, getting help. Something I would do that helped me a lot is I would ask myself, what would I tell somebody else that I really care about in this situation to do right now? And it was never the answer I wanted, but it was always the answer I needed, and it was usually rest, get help, say no. And so I might not have been able to think of it for myself, but a little practice or whatever tricks help you to kind of externalize that and apply were super helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you want to?
I
Yeah,
just
go.
want to add one thing to that, which is that that experience of breaking down after a year, right, or things coming to a head. When it comes to trauma and anniversaries, that's very common, or reminders from the past, right? That sort of just something comes up. Those are really important signals to look towards. They can help guide you to make that sort of step towards self-compassion.
Thank you. So the next question is a bit of a shift. It's something very specific. So parents that are asking about whether or not they should show pictures of their burned homes to children, depending on their age. So what kind of advice would you give to parents reflecting on how to introduce this or share this with their kids?
Let's go ahead and start with Ozzy on this one. Thank you.
That's a tough question. Every child is different, ages vary wildly within the pantheon of 11-year-olds that are out there. There's a lot of difference. Kids are always smarter than we give them credit for. They're always absorbing more than we think they are. They are understanding more, they're processing more. A lot of our program is simply designed to help parents have a good, safe, wonderful place to put their kid so that the kid isn't in the hotel room with them when they're having some of these hard conversations, because we know kids are sponges. They just absorb all of it. Even if it's nonverbal, they absorb the stress. So you should never pretend like nothing happened. You shouldn't ignore what your kid just went through. You shouldn't minimize, in the same way that we were just talking about how for grown-ups it is difficult when somebody minimizes your experience. Jennifer, I think it was you were saying, just because it makes it easier for them to process what you went through. The same is true for kids. Whether you show them their house in ashes is a difficult question. If I wouldn't do it right away, I would not do it unprompted. I would, talk to kids, sort of broker it if they are interested, if they are opting into it, if they want it, and it is your kid and you trust, and know sort of how they think about things and analyze things. I would say maybe, but I really struggle to give any sort of blanket yes or no. I mean, we always train, we're not working with our own children, but we always train people we provide sort of steam valves and outlets to help kids process throughout the day. So we'll do art, we'll do yoga and exercise and breathing exercises. And if we're doing art and a kid is drawing a house on fire, we don't, train our volunteers, or we don't ourselves ignore it or laugh it off or pretend it's something else, but we let the kid drive the conversation. And we always teach you let them guide you a level deeper. You never just dive right in with an 8-year-old and say, well, how did that make you feel? What do you miss most? What are you drawing? Tell me about it. Tell me about your experience. They will talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. And that's good. But we always teach you should follow their lead. Showing them something they don't have access to, it's hard to follow their lead. So I would be hesitant, but again, sometimes that finality that, okay, this has happened and we're moving on is easier than living in a state of uncertainty or not knowing if you're going back home or if the house is okay. Again, I think verbally it can be less upsetting than seeing the house, but Dr. Calls, I'd be fascinated in your thoughts on this too.
Can I ask a
Yeah,
favor?
I'm sorry, Jennifer, please.
Dr. Kalsa, can I have Jen just briefly talk about, because she's a mother, and then we'll go to the clinical answer. Do you mind? Is that okay? Because then I know you're going to give us like things that we can do, but if Jen could talk about some lived experience.
Sure. I can say, so the homes that were lost around me, all of them had children in them. And so I got to watch firsthand when people would come back to their lots with the debris, sometimes with families, sometimes not with families. Very common to see people just on the dirt or on their driveway, or anywhere close to their home. And I can give you two families. One family chose, the kids were 7 and 4. They never brought the kids back ever. Like they didn't want to come back. I think the parents I don't think they felt prepared to manage all of it. And then the complete opposite, there was another family that we saw them with their 2 kids, and this was a 5th grader and an 8th grader. Almost every day they were there and just together with each other, and it would be just for a few moments and then they would leave. And I think that gave them some comfort, and it was, sometimes they would stay a little longer, and it was a wild experience to be kind of watching out the window and seeing these things happen. Um, I do, just like Ozzy said, I think it depends on your child. It depends on your capacity for managing what could happen in that situation. But I think from our community, the children that had a relationship with the loss, with the debris, with the cleanup, even the families, they were out there when they came to do the debris cleanup, and they were literally pulling things that were familiar out of the debris, and with this giant claw, and dropping it for them, so they left with like a box of things, and that was so precious to them, and I think it was so cathartic for them to have that experience. But maybe it's not for everyone, right? So I think you really have to, and I'm sure Dr. Helsa will speak to this, but there could be some support from the mental health side of it to like carry you through that as well.
Yeah. So I'm not a child psychiatrist, and this is not a sort of a treatment recommendation, but I think one of the opportunities that these images have is to have a dialogue, and um, it's a dialogue that's going to happen one way or the other, whether you engage the child in it or not, right? They know what happened. And so the question here was about, should we show a picture? But I think the broader element is how are your kids responding to what's happened? How do they talk about the fire? How do they talk about the home? Um, who are they? Do they have pre-existing mental health conditions? In which case, um, there might be a reason to need to be more careful or engaged with with their child's mental health provider to sort of have that discussion, right? So if that's for sure, if there's a mental health provider in the picture, then that would be a good question to sort of ask them. Um, in general, this is a part of your family's story now. And they're going to ask you questions at different times. And so if you look at the mental health literature on and the mental health approaches for trauma treatment, prolonged exposure therapy is one, psychotherapy, where people talk about the traumatic experiences that they've had. They learn to not push it away. And the more exposure that they have over time, the more they're able to cope with it, and ultimately kind of build that resilience. So it's really going to depend on how your child is responding around this kind of instance. The other thing is that they may be shown images, they may be exposed to images, probably will be, whether it's on TV. I think in the Super Bowl, there was a commercial about the fires that was incredibly graphic, if you ask me, but it's how you're going to talk about it with them. It's also an opportunity to celebrate the good times that you had in that home, right? Remind them that a house is not a home. Home is the place where your family is. You'll make new memories in new spaces. And you can do that even where you are, wherever you are. For younger kids, this is a more specific reference, but there was and Jennifer, I don't know if you've seen this book before, but there was a great children's book based on a letter that a father wrote his daughter after the home he built.
If you open up that book, you'll see that we are the suggested organization.
There you go. There it is. Okay.
This
I love that book.
I love this book. It's this makes me want to cry because he just passed away. The author did, so I'm very sad about that. He lost his home in the CZU Lightning Complex fire. Dr. Wallace J. Nichols, J. He wrote the New York Times bestselling book, Blue Mind. And he opened our summit in 2022 by reading this book aloud. And I actually have that on our YouTube. We have his whole keynote, but then we pulled out just the book and we all sort of cried with him. But thank you. That's just what a beautiful moment. He would love that so much. And his family would love that too. Highly recommend Dear Wild Child. He asked if it was okay if he directed people to us in the book. And I was like, yeah, that's okay. I would be so honored. So thank you for that answer. I also want to say that, we've worked with, hundreds, if not thousands of families across 7 years. And the kids mostly do come out okay and resilient and strong. And this is not a sentence. It's a semicolon, if you will. It's a moment, and it needs to be attended to, and there's going to be a before and after the fire for the rest of your lives. But it's not all perilous. It really is. There is light, there's hope, there's community, there's things on the other side of it. And that doesn't mean rush it. It just means that it is on the other side of it. And a lot of our fire survivors would tell you that they did come out of it very resilient. And but it's okay to bump along the road too. It's okay if you have a setback along the way. Those things are all fine. I am hoping that I really like the question about, I just want to address compassion for just a moment. And Jen, I'm going to hijack your role. One of the questions is, there doesn't seem to be compassion within the community if you are dealing with anything other than a rebuild or cleanup. For those of us leasing, it has truly been a throwaway. I totally hear that. I just so hear you on that. We fight against this in every community we walk into. If you are fire affected and you deserve compassion, and if someone's not treating you with compassion, then we can help you find a circle where maybe they will treat you with compassion, but you deserve it. I didn't even lose my home, so I had very little self-compassion the first year, because I was like, I'm just going to dedicate my entire life to everybody who lost their home. But in the meantime, I had my whole hometown was looked like the apocalypse, and it was really hard. And you deserve compassion no matter what stage you're in. And people are just they're angry a little bit at people who lost their home that they owned and all their things in it. We've heard that from them, that there's a certain amount of resentment for people who didn't lose things, and that's really normal too. I have a family member who passed away over the summer of cancer. And one of the things that we talked about before was how she's like, I'm just so angry and I'm jealous. I'm jealous that I know the people around me are going to live. And it makes me, and I can, it seemed very raw and very real, and I could handle it. And so we talked about it a lot, but it was, be angry, grieve over your life. You can do that. It's a good thing to do. You deserve compassion. We also don't accept it when people are like, we only want to help, a certain segment of the population. I don't do that. I won't do that. I walk into your fire. I will help every single person who shows up in front of me who's fire affected. And that's from people who lost family members, homes, leasing, renting, or just their neighborhoods, and all their memories are gone. Like, your memories are attached to that place, and you deserve our compassion and service. And I just want to commit that to you, that I'm sorry that's happening to you, that it's not okay. And then Jen, if you don't mind, just this is very important. If you can read the question that just came up, how do you handle real disappointment? Thank you for letting me wax on about that.
Yeah, so I thought that was great to acknowledge that. Before I read that, just in our community, we found that the people in standing homes, the smoke damaged homes, they really stuffed all of their emotion down and hid it because they didn't lose their home or they didn't lose a person. And fast forward 1-2 years down the road, and these people were suffering in silence. And if there's one thing I can say to communities is that everyone's impacted. You've lost your community, even if you haven't lost your home. Everything doesn't feel normal, and you are experiencing this equally as much. So just to second what Jennifer said, if there's any space to find others who are going through this and advocate for that together, it's important, because it's really lonely to just suffer in silence when you're going through this very real thing. So the question was, how do you handle real disappointment? And in fact, anger at someone married to a relative that still has not asked, what can I do to help? Or said, I'm sorry for your loss. I think the question is, what's experienced often is people on the peripheral that mean well, but don't really show up in areas where they could, or they don't maybe know how to help. So I don't know, who do you want to go to first to answer that? But
Well, it's our last question, so if you don't mind, maybe we'll go to Ozzy, then Jen, then Dr. Khalsa, if you can finish us out, and then we'll kick it back to Adam. Is that all right with everybody? Okay, let's
Sure.
do that. Thank you.
Sure. And I'm far from an expert in family dynamics, but one thing that we do teach at Project Camp is that behavior is communication. And again, grief and it not knowing how to help and the trauma itself shows up differently in different people. And some people think that the best thing they can do is help you return to normal by talking to you like nothing happened, and that may not be the right thing. Other people try to dive way too deep, and that may not be the right thing. But in the same way that every person reacts differently and manifests and shows differently, sort of what they've been through, their halo of helpers are the same. That may not be the case in this instance. This may just be somebody who hasn't thought to reach out to you yet, but it could be a reflection of them not feeling close enough to talk about intimate things with you, like grief and loss and what you've gone through. I can't put myself in your shoes. I can't imagine. I can't put that on them. But that would be my advice: is the helpers and the people who've gone through this, it shows up differently in each of them.
I'm going to go to Jen next, but I do want to say this, like, it's hard for people to hold other people's pain sometimes, especially when there's so much of it. And I'm not excusing that person for not asking, but it's important to find people who can hold your pain, who are not afraid of it. And part of our work is that we're never afraid of your pain, and you can find ordinary people, professionals, all of that. But you can also ask that person, because if it was like my mother-in-law, who's actually the nicest person on the planet, but I'd be like, why haven't you asked? I'm just curious. And it could be that they're uncomfortable with other people's pain. Go ahead, Jen.
This question makes me think of how many expectations that I didn't know I would have of people in this, because there were ways I would respond to somebody, and kind of looking at the world to give that back to me, and feeling let down when that didn't happen, and really, just as Jennifer said, if you have the kind of relationship where you can ask, it might be a curious, question to ask, if it feels safe and it feels, appropriate. But I think in my experience, there were people that just really disappeared from my life when this was happening. And some of them I never got an answer why. And 3 years later, those people just don't have a big impact in my life, because this hard thing was happening, and we just didn't stay connected through it. Like right or wrong, but you'd really never know why people are behaving or responding the way they are unless you talk about it. Mhm.
And as a psychiatrist, I'll sort of wrap up to echo on that by saying, of course, talking with the person is probably the best way to get more information, so that at least you can know, is it because they feel uncomfortable, or is it something else? That was actually a similar element that was in another question about someone's parents moving in, and sort of how do you sort of navigate that, right? These are, suggestions for setting boundaries. Well, talk to them. Even if it's uncomfortable, and you say, well, I attended this webinar, and I was told to ask about this, right? Blame us for it. Make us the kooky ones, and that's fine. Maybe they need some boundaries themselves for to have their own way to communicate with you. Maybe, the parents, they need their own schedule to have their own quiet space in the house, so that the kids, et cetera, aren't barging in their room, et cetera. So communication's key.
Well, I want to thank our panelists and our wonderful moderator as well for this session this evening. Thank all of you for joining us. And for those of you watching recorded, hello from the past. A couple of websites to keep in mind for the future. So ourki.org/pallyfire for information and resources. And I also want to highly recommend afterthefireusa.org, which is a fantastic resource. We have been just overjoyed to work with them on these webinars and more. They're a really, really fantastic organization. So thank you all so much for, Dr. Kulsa, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to add one thing. I'm going to circulate some specific information that are related to mental health resources for Californians. So I didn't want to take time to go over it, but I will circulate that so that you have some additional information you can refer to if you think you need it.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. And hopefully we see you in the webinar on the 19th on navigating financial decision making. And thank you again so much for joining us, and have a good night.